Hi, my name's Elise. 4 years ago, my family didn't just turn their backs on me. They tried to erase me completely. They whispered lies. They smirked behind my back. They buried me under silence and shame. Then, when they thought I'd disappear forever, they sent me an invitation, expecting me to play along and smile. But when you're buried alive, you learn how to claw your way out, and you don't come back empty-handed. Tonight, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to rewrite the chapter they wanted to tear from the book. Before we start, I want to ask you, if your family erased you, would you forgive or fight back? It had been one of those exhausting court days that made the city air in Savannah feel thick with tension and stale coffee. As I pushed open the door to my small loft apartment near the riverfront, the late afternoon sunlight poured in, casting long shadows over the worn hardwood floor, making the place look warmer than it felt. I slipped off my heels, letting them thud softly against the wall, and dropped my briefcase onto the battered mahogany desk. The mail scattered in a careless heap. Overdue bills, advertisements for local restaurants I'd never try. And then, my eyes caught something out of place. A thick cream envelope, heavy in my hands, embossed with the Callahan family crest in deep navy blue. My fingers froze. The world seemed to shrink to just that moment, the space between my hand and the envelope. My heart tightened as if someone pressed a fist around it. I hadn't seen that crest since the night I walked away, 4 years ago. After my brother Mason had stood before our entire family and raised his glass in toast to my disgrace, I wiped my palms nervously on my skirt and finally picked up the envelope. It was ridiculously formal. Navy wax seal. The kind you'd expect from a royal decree, not from a family that treated you like a ghost. I traced the curve of my name written on the front, Elise Callahan, then slowly slid a letter opener under the seal. The faint scent of expensive paper and old wounds hit me simultaneously. Inside was a wedding invitation, so ornate it felt almost cruel. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Mason Callahan and Olivia Bennett. My stomach twisted. Mason, the golden child, the family's pride, the heir to the Callahan construction empire, at least in their eyes, and Olivia Bennett? I didn't recognize the name. Probably another carefully chosen socialite to polish the family's image. I placed the invitation down carefully, as if it might shatter. Then something else slipped from the envelope. A plain, unmarked piece of notebook paper. No seal. No flourish. My mother's handwriting was shaky, almost urgent. Please come. I miss you. They don't know I'm reading this. Mom? I stared at the words. My breath caught in my throat. The same mother who had sat there in silence. The night Mason raised his glass and called me a disgrace. The same mother who hadn't so much as moved a finger while I packed my bags in front of the entire family and stepped out into the cold night. And now, this. A secret plea, hidden like something forbidden. For a moment, the edges of the room blurred, and I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. The cool granite pressed firmly into my palms. Without thinking, my hand went up to the silver necklace around my neck. The tiny gavel charm my grandfather gave me the day I passed the bar exam. He was the only one who ever looked at me and said, "You're enough, Elise, just as you are." I pressed the charm to my lips. For courage, or maybe to hold myself together. Memories crashed through me like a wave. Thanksgiving, 4 years ago. Mason, already a few glasses deep, clinking his wine glass against Dad's bourbon, voice loud enough to cut through the polite murmurs of cousins and aunts. "She thinks she's too good for us now," he sneered, laughing cruelly. "Trading the family business for some fancy lawyer job. What a damn disgrace." Laughter echoed. Coughs. The scraping of silverware against plates. And Mom, eyes wet but lips sealed tight. Dad? He didn't even meet my gaze. I stood frozen, 28 years old, humiliated like a child called out in front of the whole school. No defense, no rescue, just silence. That was the night I stuffed my car with everything I could carry and drove away without a backward glance. Until now. I blinked, forcing myself back to the present. The wedding invitation gleamed arrogantly under my kitchen light, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Was this some desperate attempt to erase the past? A polished family photo op to pull the prodigal daughter back into the fold? Or worse, a trap set to humiliate me all over again? The RSVP card lay there, blank and expectant. God, part of me wanted to tear it into pieces and throw it away where it belonged. But another part, the part that still hurt on cold December mornings, the part that wondered if they ever missed me, if they ever wished I'd come home. Not for them, for me, because maybe it was time I stopped letting their silence define my worth. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the heavy silence. I grabbed it quickly and opened Maya's contact, my closest friend, my lifeline through every ugly chapter in this family drama. I hesitated just a moment, then hit send. The city outside hummed softly. Distant sirens wailing, engines rumbling past, life continuing without me. I slid the invitation back into the envelope, tucked it carefully into my briefcase, and closed my eyes. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. The Callahan family had no clue who they were trying to pull back into their world. The question lingered, twisting in my mind like smoke against a frosted window. Should I walk back into that lion's den? I didn't know. Not yet. Instead, I moved toward the kitchen cabinet and opened it. My hand reached instinctively for the bottle of whiskey hidden behind a box of herbal tea I never touched. I poured 2 fingers into a glass, no ice, and stood there staring at the RSVP card lying on the worn wooden table like it held the power to change everything. I took a slow sip, feeling the burn spread through my chest. It wasn't enough to drown the memories clawing their way back. Thanksgiving, 4 years ago. I could still smell the roasted turkey, the expensive wine, the faint scent of Mom's floral perfume mixed with candles that smelled a little too sweet. The Callahan estate had been packed as usual with cousins, distant aunts, and business partners squeezed into the grand dining hall like some staged ad for perfect American families. Back then, I was still new to the courtroom grind, carrying student loans like a second skin. I worked as a public defender, the least glamorous career anyone in my family could imagine. I remember showing up late that day, fresh from an emergency arraignment, my jacket still wrinkled, shoes scuffed from sprinting across courthouse parking lots. Mason caught sight of me as I slipped into the seat at the far end of the table. His eyes sparkled with that kind of mischief that always spelled trouble for someone else. The night wore on. Toast began, first Dad, then Uncle Mark, then a few others, raising glasses to new jobs, babies, and new houses in the right zip codes. Then Mason stood up. "Some of us," he said, his voice oily and smooth, locking eyes with me, a cruel smile creeping across his face, "choose to serve the community. Others choose to shame the family legacy." There was a ripple of awkward laughter. Some family friends raised eyebrows but said nothing. I sat frozen, the turkey on my plate going cold. Mom gripped her wine glass tighter. Dad stared intently at the centerpiece as if it had suddenly become fascinating. No one spoke in my defense, the kind of silence that screams. I folded my napkin slowly, deliberately, set it on my plate, and stood. No one stopped me. No one even asked where I was going. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling so badly it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. I never showed up at another family event after that night. And not once, never once, did anyone call to ask why. I drained the whiskey in one long pull and slammed the glass down harder than I intended. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet apartment. Part of me wanted to believe things could be different now, that maybe Mom's note meant there was a crack in the stone wall they'd built between us. But another part, the smarter part, knew better. I glanced at the RSVP card again, and then reached for my laptop. If I was going to walk into that wedding, I needed to know exactly who Olivia Bennett was. It didn't take long. Public records, law firm bios, court transcripts. Olivia Bennett wasn't just some ornamental bride chosen for show. She was a damn good attorney. Specializing in tenant rights, fighting for families against greedy landlords and corrupt housing boards, I scrolled through her cases until I froze. 8 months ago, She had been the young lawyer standing across from me in court, defending a group of tenants against a ruthless developer. She was fierce, articulate, relentless, and she won. Back then, I never connected her to Mason. No hints, no flickers of recognition, no fake smiles, no smug nods, just a woman fighting for justice. The irony twisted in my gut like a dull blade. Mason, the same brother who stood and humiliated me for shaming the family legacy, was marrying a woman who probably admired the very judge he had disowned. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, heart pounding. Maybe fate had a sense of humor after all. The clock ticked forward into the night, steady as a slow drumbeat. I looked down at the RSVP card. This time, my hands didn't shake. I grabbed a pen from the counter, took a deep breath, and in one clean, deliberate motion wrote, "I'll be there." I folded the card neatly, slid it back into the return envelope, and pressed the seal shut. No second guessing. No theatrics. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one, but not the one they expected. The whiskey glass sat forgotten on the counter as I turned off the lights and headed to bed. The night air slipping through the cracked window smelled like rain and possibility. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet fire sparked. The next morning, I slipped the sealed RSVP card into the mailbox, lingering longer than necessary as the metal door clanged shut behind me. There was something final in that sound, like slamming one gate on the past and cracking open another toward whatever waited ahead. Savannah lay wrapped in a cloudy hush, the kind that pressed low against the skin, promising rain but never quite delivering. I didn't go straight back to the courthouse. Instead, I turned left at the main intersection, letting instinct guide me down streets I hadn't walked in years. The family cemetery was a few miles beyond Savannah's city center, tucked behind an iron fence draped with ancient oaks that whispered secrets in the breeze. As soon as I pulled into the gravel lot, my chest tightened, old griefs rising like sediment settling in a glass. I reached over and grabbed the bouquet of fresh lilies from the passenger seat, smoothing the crinkled paper around their stems. Then I climbed the gentle hill toward the far corner, where under a weathered marble headstone lay the one man who had ever truly seen me. No conditions, no compromises. Judge Elias Callahan. Grandpa. I knelt carefully, brushing away a few stubborn leaves, and placed the lilies at the base of his stone. The engraving had faded over the years, but the words he lived by still burned bright in my memory. Justice without fear, integrity without compromise. I sat back on my heels, letting the silence surround me. From the inside pocket of my jacket, I pulled out a small, yellowed envelope I'd carried with me for years, but never opened. It had been the last thing Grandpa handed me before cancer stole the strength from his once commanding voice. "When you need it most," he'd said. Well, if not now, then when? I slid my finger under the brittle seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. His handwriting trembled, but carried its old strength. Real power isn't loud, Elise. It's standing tall without pushing others down. You won't always be their favorite. You weren't born to be. You were born to outgrow them. I stared at the letter until the words blurred, a tight knot forming in my throat. All these years, I had tried to prove myself, explain myself, to belong somewhere that never truly wanted me. And he had known. He had known I would outgrow them long before I even understood what that meant. Tucking the letter back into its envelope, I pressed my hand over the small silver gavel hanging around my neck, the last physical piece of him I had. Not for show, not for them, for me. The first drops of rain kissed the back of my hand, soft as a whisper. The letter tucked safely into my briefcase, I headed toward the courthouse. By the time I arrived, the clouds had broken into a steady mist. I climbed the marble steps, nodding to the bailiffs and clerks who barely glanced up from their screens. The familiarity grounded me until I heard my name whispered nearby. Judge Callahan? Yeah, that's her. Olivia Bennett said it herself. Half the cases she wins now come from studying Judge Callahan's rulings inside and out. I slowed my pace, pretending to skim the docket in my hand. Olivia Bennett, my brother Mason's fiancé, learning from me. Not from Mason, Not from the so-called Callahan dynasty, but from the disgrace they tried to erase. It was almost laughable. I kept walking, my face neutral, but inside something shifted. Something hardened. Her lips parted as if to speak, but I was already moving. I crossed the restaurant floor without looking back, the pendant a solid weight against my chest. Outside, the mist had thickened into a light rain, but the air smelled cleaner now. Lighter. As if the city itself had exhaled something old and bitter. I walked toward the streetlights, each step steady, each breath deeper than the last. The rain from the night before had dried into a hazy mist that clung stubbornly to the morning air. I stood in front of my closet, weighing my options. It wasn't just about getting dressed. It was armor, choosing the version of myself I wanted the family to see, the woman they tried to write out of the script. After a moment, I settled on a simple black sheath dress, structured but not severe, and a pair of low-heeled pumps, polished but unassuming. I looped the silver Lady Justice pendant around my neck, letting it rest just below my collarbone, a quiet reminder, a silent weapon. On the drive to the Callahan estate, Savannah blurred past, the pastel row houses, the salty tang of the nearby river, the low hum of tourists trickling into the historic district. I barely noticed. My mind locked into a slow, gathering rhythm, like a storm coiling before the strike. By the time I pulled into the long, circular driveway, several cars were already there. Expensive, gleaming, loud in the way only old money can afford to be. I cut the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The moment I crossed the threshold, the room's temperature shifted. Polite smiles, tight hugs, air kisses that never touched skin. The kind of welcome reserved for strangers who remind you of something best forgotten. I handed my coat to a young server in a starched white jacket and moved through the entryway. Past familiar family portraits lining the hall. Mason as a baby, Mason at college graduation, Mason cutting the ribbon on the new Callahan pediatric wing. My absence was a hollow space nobody acknowledged. I found myself drifting toward the side parlor, where a few cousins had gathered. Their voices floated on too much champagne and the cruel giddiness that always seeped into Callahan celebrations. She thinks she's somebody now. One snickered. Just because she's got a desk and a robe. Another laughed, an ugly nasal sound. Yeah, she's just playing dress up. Real success? That's in the blood. I stood frozen for a moment. The words slid over me like sleet. If you're drawn into Elise's journey and want to see how she takes back her story, hit subscribe and stay tuned. The next chapter is just around the corner, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Sharp, icy, wounding. But they didn't pierce me the way they once would have. No, this time they sharpened something inside me instead, tempered it. I turned on my heel without a word, my spine straight, heels clicking decisively against the polished marble floor. The gathering swelled toward the main ballroom, where a long, gleaming table groaned beneath piles of hors d'oeuvres and floral arrangements so garish they bordered on funerary. Champagne flowed freely, lubricating old gossip and fresh resentments. I drifted toward the edge of the crowd, sipping water from a cut-glass tumbler, my eyes scanning without really seeing. There, near the fireplace, Mason held court, charming a circle of well-dressed admirers. Olivia stood a few feet away, laughing at something he said, though her eyes flicked nervously in my direction now and then. A fork tapped against a champagne glass. The room hushed. Mason raised his glass. That practiced, polished smile stretched across his face, the one he wore at fundraisers and board meetings. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming," he began, voice warm and magnanimous. "It means the world to have our family, those who've carried the Callahan name with pride, and our dear friends here tonight." Polite laughter rippled through the room. "And, of course," he continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd and pausing just long enough on me, "we're grateful for all kinds of success stories, even those who think a black robe and a desk make up for, well, a real legacy." Another ripple of laughter, sharper this time. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until the cold bit into my skin. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. If Mason was hoping for a reaction, he wouldn't get one. Not yet. I let the laughter wash over me like a tide that could no longer pull me under. Instead, I raised my glass silently, not in toast, not in surrender, but as a promise to myself. Never again. Never again would I let them diminish me. Never again would I swallow my truth for their comfort. Never again would I stand silently while they rewrote my story. The pendant around my neck felt warm against my skin, its weight anchoring me. The rest of the evening blurred. Empty conversations, forced laughter, the clatter of glasses and silverware. But I was somewhere else entirely, already charting the course of what was next. Because the reckoning had begun. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The clink of champagne glasses echoed faintly in my ears as I stepped onto the back veranda of the Callahan estate, where the night air carried the salty bite of the river. I needed space, needed a moment to breathe away from the tight smiles and thinly veiled contempt inside. I wasn't alone for long. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Only one person wore that particular brand of entitlement like a second skin. Mason. He leaned casually against the stone railing beside me, his profile glowing in the soft amber light from the terrace lamps. "Quite the turnout, huh?" he drawled, swirling the last dregs of whiskey in his glass. I said nothing, keeping my gaze on the dark water beyond the hedges. "You've made quite a splash yourself," he continued, mock admiration threading his words. "Showing up all righteous, draped in that little pendant like it means something." Still, I stayed silent. It wasn't until he chuckled, low and condescending, that I turned toward him, my voice steady and precise. "One more public lie about me, Mason," I said, "and I won't stay quiet." He froze mid-sip, lowering his glass slowly. For a beat, the only sound was the whisper of wind through the nearby palms. Then he smirked, the familiar smug tilt of his mouth I'd known since childhood. "You wouldn't dare," he said, voice dripping with confidence. "You throw a fit and you look petty. You stay quiet and you look polished. Either way, I win." I let the silence stretch between us, letting him marinate in his arrogance. Then I turned and walked away. No words needed. I already knew the truth. By the time the sun dipped low the next evening, casting long orange streaks across the Savannah skyline, I was pulling into the grand banquet hall where the rehearsal dinner was being held. The place was almost absurd in its opulence. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished to mirror brightness, centerpieces so large they blocked half the table conversations. The Callahans never did anything halfway. Inside, the crowd thickened. Relatives, family friends, business associates. Everyone decked out in their finest, buzzing with shallow excitement. I entered quietly, head held high, the Lady Justice pendant catching the light at my throat. Eyes followed me, as they always did. Some warm, most wary, a few hostile behind polite smiles. I spotted Mason across the room, his arm looped possessively around Olivia's waist, grinning like the king of a crumbling castle. He caught my gaze for a split second and winked. That's when I knew. I found my assigned seat at one of the long banquet tables, tucked between distant cousins I barely recognized. A folded program card sat neatly on each plate, listing the evening's schedule. I picked mine up and froze. The front was innocuous enough. "Welcome to the rehearsal dinner of Mason Callahan and Olivia Bennett." But when I flipped the program to the back, where the family accolades were proudly listed, a tradition at Callahan events, my name was conspicuously missing. It wasn't an accident. Aunt Margaret's 2-year term on the board of a small hospital wing was there. Cousin Philip's second-place finish in a statewide rowing competition was printed in bold letters. Even great-uncle Charles's lifetime achievement in accounting earned a mention. But me, Elise Callahan, Harvard Law graduate, state-appointed judge at 34, erased. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers, not from anger, but from the sheer will it took to remain composed. Across the room, Mason lifted his glass in my direction, a mocking grin twisting his lips. The crowd laughed and chattered around me, oblivious to the slight. I placed the program down carefully, smoothing it flat with both hands. Under the table, my fingers found the Lady Justice pendant resting against my skin. I closed my eyes briefly, letting its cool weight steady me. No tears tonight, no scenes, only decisions. He thought he was silencing me. He was only setting the stage for his own downfall. As the first speeches began, saccharine tributes to Mason's brilliance, Olivia's grace, I slipped my phone from my clutch beneath the tablecloth. One simple text to Maya, my steadfast ally. Ready the documents. It's time. The message sent with a soft ping. I slid the phone back into my bag and raised my water glass slowly, deliberately to my lips. Across the room, Mason laughed too loudly at something Olivia said, completely unaware the ground beneath him was already shifting. He wouldn't see it coming. They never did. The evening hummed with heavy tension, the kind that clings to the back of your neck and reminds you that no matter how poised you seem, war is closer than peace. I adjusted the collar of my dress shirt beneath my fitted blazer, feeling the cool touch of my grandfather's pendant like a steady heartbeat. It was late spring, but the night air over Savannah held a sharpness. Like the city itself knew a storm was coming. I parked a block away from the final pre-wedding event, a formal cocktail gathering at one of the Callahans' oldest friends' estates. An old plantation house draped in string lights, thick with the scent of gardenias and money. Inside, the grand parlor buzzed. Waiters in starched uniforms floated between polished guests, balancing silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Laughter swirled above the clink of glasses. I walked through the crowd like a ghost, unfazed by double takes and tight smiles. I wasn't there to play nice. Olivia was easy to spot, surrounded by a cluster of relatives. She looked beautiful, radiant even. But something in her posture was off. A slight stiffness to her shoulders, a practiced smile just a shade too bright. I moved closer, careful, patient. The conversation started light. Olivia gushed about a recent case she'd won, a housing rights battle for a low-income family facing eviction. Her eyes sparkled with genuine pride. And to think, she laughed, it all started because I read that article last year about Judge Elise Callahan's ruling on tenant protections. It changed how I approach everything now. There was a beat of silence, a vacuum where acknowledgement should have filled the space. Then Mason stepped in, casual and cutting. "Oh, that was just a novelty case," he said, flashing his polished grin. "You know how it is. Some people dabble for attention." Olivia's brow furrowed slightly. She glanced at me from the corner of her eye, but said nothing. Neither did I. Not yet. I waited. Another hour dragged by, filled with carefully choreographed civility. Finally, the moment arrived. The hosts called for a brief family toast in the main salon. A tradition, apparently. Everyone gathered near the grand piano, flutes of champagne in hand. Mason stood at the center, basking in attention, the golden sun in his prime. I made my way quietly to the front, clutching a simple manila folder close to my side. The room hushed. Mason raised his glass high. "And here's to family," he said, voice rich and smooth. "The ones who uphold our name with pride and honor." Polite applause rippled through the room. I waited until the last clap faded into uncomfortable quiet. Then I stepped forward. No microphone, no raised voice, just my presence. I laid the folder on the grand piano's polished surface and opened it with slow, deliberate movements. The documents inside caught the chandelier's light. Headlines, magazine features, formal letters from the state judiciary, commendations for community impact, awards for legal excellence, praise from organizations Mason had once courted for their approval. All with my name on them. All things Mason had spent years convincing the family and Olivia never existed. I picked up one of the letters and unfolded it carefully. For outstanding service in judicial equity and commitment to public interest law, I read aloud, my voice steady, the words slicing clean through the carefully spun image they'd crafted. I let the silence bloom. "Funny," I said, laying the letter flat against the piano. "For someone who allegedly couldn't handle life, I seem to have been rather busy changing lives." A ripple ran through the crowd. Heads turned, murmurs buzzed. Mason's smile faltered for the first time all evening. I didn't look at him. Instead, I turned my eyes to Olivia. The color drained from her face as realization washed over her, slow and brutal. She stared at the documents, then at Mason, then back at me. You could almost hear the cracks splintering inside her. She took a step back, just one. A small, instinctive retreat. "You lied," she said, not loud, but clear enough to carry across the stunned room. "You lied to everyone." Mason opened his mouth, but no words came out. Olivia reached up and, with hands barely trembling, slipped the engagement ring from her finger. The room fell deathly silent. She didn't look at Mason when she spoke again. She looked at me. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words were clean and sharp as glass. "Thank you for showing me the truth." She set the ring down on the edge of the piano, the platinum band catching the chandelier light in a sharp final glint. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her posture straight, her pace unhurried. Not running, not broken, but free. Behind me, Mason's voice finally broke through. Cracked, frantic, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The silence he left in Olivia's wake was louder than any speech I could have given, and it was only the beginning. The last echoes of Olivia's words still hung in the air when I stepped into the crisp evening, leaving behind the crumbling facade of the Callahan family's perfect image. The grand estate loomed behind me, lit up like a lantern in the dark, but somehow it already felt smaller, diminished. Like all the weight it once carried evaporated the moment she took that ring off. I walked toward my car, heart pounding a quiet, steady rhythm. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt free. But somewhere deep down, I knew Mason wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. By the time I reached my apartment later that night, the first signs had already begun. I kicked off my heels, shrugged out of my blazer, and poured a glass of water when my phone buzzed violently against the kitchen counter. I glanced down and felt my stomach clench. Headlines. Not from reputable outlets? No. These were the trash tabloids and gossip blogs that fed on scandal like vultures circling a dying animal. Anonymous source claims disgraced judge bullied way into bench appointment. Former classmates say Elise Callahan was emotionally unstable. One after another, the smear campaign assembled itself right in front of me. The articles were careful, never quite slander, but slimy enough to plant doubt. Recycled anonymous quotes, hints without proof. Old doctored photos painted me in the worst light possible. And it didn't take long to trace the source. A boutique PR firm tucked away in Atlanta, known for crisis management and reputation realignment. The same firm Mason had hired years ago to spin Dad's malpractice lawsuit into a heroic sacrifice for patient care. I exhaled slowly, letting the wave of anger pass through me without pulling me under. Mason wasn't clever. He was predictable. And I had been ready. Instead of scrambling, instead of firing off emotional statements or panicked denials, I pulled up the press package Maya and I had prepared weeks ago, the moment I decided I wasn't playing defense anymore. The next morning, while Savannah yawned awake, my team released a single devastating post across all my public channels. No ranting, no pleading, just the quiet, brutal force of truth. Attached were certified copies of my court appointment records, letters of endorsement from senior judges who had mentored me, official awards and media coverage detailing my work in public service law, housing reform, and juvenile justice. And at the top, a simple quote in bold, "Facts are stubborn things." John Adams. No hashtags, no drama, just undeniable proof. The ripple effect was immediate. By noon, every major news outlet had picked it up. Local talk radio buzzed, with outrage. Not at me, but at the obvious clumsy smear attempt. Columnists called it a shameful act of desperation. Public defenders I'd worked alongside, families I'd helped in housing courts, even former law professors stepped forward to vouch for me, unsolicited and fierce. Sympathy poured in, not because I begged for it, but because truth has a way of making liars look even smaller. Meanwhile, Mason's camp scrambled. Rumors spread that his own PR firm dropped him overnight to avoid the backlash. His donors pulled back. Invitations to appearances were quietly rescinded. And the family? They did what the Callahans always did when things got ugly. They disappeared behind polite smiles and carefully crafted statements. But not this time. This time, their silence was part of the story. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd helped bury me. And now, they could all stand in the crater they'd dug. Late that afternoon, after the official family brunch had been hastily canceled under the excuse of private matters, I wandered the grounds of the estate. The sky overhead was a brilliant, angry blue, streaked with thin bands of clouds, as if even nature couldn't decide whether to mourn or celebrate. I wandered past the manicured rose gardens, the koi ponds, the marble statues imported from Italy. Everything designed to make the Callahans look better than they really were. When I reached the edge of the wide front lawn, I paused, letting the cool breeze whip loose strands of hair from my braid. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Software hesitant. I turned. Olivia. She wasn't dressed like a bride-to-be anymore. No fancy gown, no designer heels, just jeans, a simple blouse, and a face stripped of pretense. She crossed the grass slowly, the distance between us closing with every step. When she stopped in front of me, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she held out her hand. Not in apology, not in pity, but in solidarity. I stared at her for a moment. Then I took it. Her grip was steady, strong, not as a stranger, but as something else entirely. The sun was just dipping below the horizon when Olivia and I finally parted ways. She walked back toward the main house, shoulders straighter, lighter somehow, her steps carving a new path I doubted Mason could ever follow. I lingered a moment longer on the lawn, the breeze stirring the hem of my blazer, the world around me shifting into something unfamiliar, and finally, something mine. The next few days unfolded in slow, inevitable waves. Mason's downfall wasn't cinematic. It didn't come with sirens or dramatic outbursts. It came with hushed meetings behind closed doors, urgent whispers about disciplinary hearings and irreparable reputational damage. It came when invitations to prestigious medical boards were quietly rescinded, when former allies stopped answering his calls, when the bright future he'd been handed on a silver platter tarnished right before his eyes. For once, the Callahan family couldn't spin the narrative fast enough. Their carefully crafted facade cracked, then splintered. The calls started trickling in, second cousins, distant aunts, even my father's old law school friends, each trying in their own clumsy way to offer sympathy without taking responsibility. We always knew you were special, Elise. I never believed what they said. You're stronger than all of them combined. Too little, too late. I responded to none of it, because the truth had already done what years of arguing never could. It stood, and for me, that was enough. I turned my focus to the life I'd built far from their polished lies. The federal judgeship I'd been offered, a position they couldn't touch, couldn't twist into something ugly, waited patiently for my signature. It was a role earned through late nights, impossible cases, and the quiet, relentless belief I didn't need their permission to be great. I signed the acceptance letter with a steady hand. A year later, on a balmy spring evening, I stood at the entrance of the Savannah Community Foundation Gala, an event I helped organize, not for prestige, not for recognition, but for the neighborhoods that had trusted me long before anyone else did. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, jasmine thick in the breeze. Inside the modest ballroom, there were no gilded mirrors, no desperate performances for approval, just people who believed in rebuilding what was broken. As I moved through the crowd, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, not from my bloodline, but from the trenches. Fellow public defenders, community organizers, young lawyers who once sat across from me in packed courtrooms, wide-eyed and determined. I wore a simple black gown that night. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry, except one thing. Around my neck, tucked just beneath my collarbone, lay my grandfather's pendant, the old, worn carving of Lady Justice, gleaming softly under the lights. It wasn't just an heirloom anymore. It was a reminder, a promise, that I would never again let anyone define who I was or who I wasn't. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing near the wide bay windows overlooking the Savannah harbor. The city lights shimmered against the water, blurred and beautiful. I touched the pendant lightly, feeling its familiar weight. "They tried to erase me from the story," I whispered, a small smile curving my lips. "I wrote a better one instead." If you've been following my story, you know the path hasn't been easy, but every step, every challenge, every betrayal has shaped who I am today. I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm standing for anyone who's ever been silenced or written off by those who should have lifted them up. I want to hear from you, your thoughts, your experiences, your encouragement. Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever felt overlooked or underestimated? How did you find the strength to keep moving forward? Sharing your story could be the spark someone else needs to keep going. Life isn't about waiting for permission to be great or for others to validate your worth. It's about owning your truth and refusing to let anyone else define your story. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about rewriting the narrative, reclaiming your power, and creating a future that reflects your true self, not the version others want to see. So, as you reflect on my journey, think about the areas in your life where you might be holding back because of fear or doubt. What truths are you ready to claim? What boundaries do you need to set to protect your peace? Remember, growth often starts at the edge of discomfort. Embrace the challenges, listen to your inner strength, and trust that you're capable of more than you realize. Thank you for standing with me. Your support means the world. It's a reminder that none of us are alone in our struggles. Together, we can turn pain into power and setbacks into comebacks. Hit subscribe to follow what happens next, and let's keep rewriting the story, one brave step at a time.